I was like, yours about small, medium,
We're working on the same project.
Yeah.
We just decided, like,
I think
very
there's
recently.
I think there was a meta conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theory exists. So
We figured out a space in the timeline.
All right. So this week is where we, last week I concentrated on pretty strictly on music. That was a music theory thing. This week we're going to get into the first kind of application of engineering, right? Music and engineering. So we're going to hit temperament, which tells us as engineers how to create notes or create sine waves, create frequencies based on notes. Okay, so start with the outline. Definitions, conventions, notes on the scale. We're going to talk a little bit about how we're going to describe multiple things. We talked about there are many C's. Well, we're going to use one system of defining them. We're going to talk about basics of scales, harmonic series, harmonious relationships, go over what cents are, not the things that are 1/100th of a dollar. Just intonation. There are many types of intonation. We'll describe what intonation is. The kind of historical one I'm going over is just intonation. I think that's the most common. We've also got like Pythagorean and some various other possibilities there. We'll talk about how we create the scales in just intonation. I'll talk about the problems with just intonation, and then the solution, kind of the modern equivalent, is equal intonation. And we'll talk about how to create scales and talk a little bit about instruments. And all this, to keep in mind, it's all semi-fluid, right? Because I'm talking about things that are sometimes fractions of a hertz or a few hertz, a couple of cents. On a woodwind instrument, that's a little bit of litany. These things, temperature change will affect them. You're playing with a large band, the intonation is kind of a fluid thing. It is what it has to be. And that's some of the stuff that I am not very familiar with, but we'll hopefully learn. That's something to consider. That although I'm giving you formulas, it's not all straight. It's music and some things just flow. Okay, so these are some definitions. A lot of this lecture, I should warn you, came out of a couple of Dover books that are listed in the references. One is Music, Physics, and Engineering by Harry Olson, and the other, I think it's called Science of Sound, or Sound of Music, and it's by Sir James Jean. You know Dover books? You find them in Barnes & Noble. They're usually really cheap, and a lot of them are based on out-of-print books. So Dover buys up rights, I guess, and publishes them cheap. So you can buy, like, the Music, Physics, and Engineering used to be a staple at Barnes & Noble for like 10 or 15 bucks for a soft cover. And that's a pretty decent book. There's another book called, I think it's called Music Engineering. Yeah, same as this course, but no and. Music Engineering. And they used to stock that at the Barnes & Noble across the street. And that's a decent one. That actually covers most of the same topics we do in class. I don't make it a required book anymore because I found I didn't like the way it covers certain things. Anyway, so these terms are out of the older books, the Olson and the Jeans books. Okay, so we're going to talk about a tone, being a sound sensation, having a pitch, basically something that's capable of exciting the auditory nerve, right? Because what we're concerned with here is human hearing. It's, if you create a sine wave in the forest, is it a note? The note is how we indicate the pitch. So that's everything we talked about last week. Half notes, whole notes, the staff, all that stuff. Again, I'm taking a Western notation. If anybody wants to, you have input from other notations, other systems of intonation, I'd love to hear. I don't know anything. I've heard, I think it's certain cultures divide the octave into 5 notes. So there are lots of different variations. Unfortunately, I don't know them, but I'd love to hear anybody else. Overtone is something that has is part of a complex tone with a pitch higher than the fundamental. And we'll get to the fundamental. A partial is something, it's basically the fundamental building block, how you break something down. It's a physical component. Okay, the fundamental frequency is the lowest frequency. Same thing like if you're dealing with Fourier analysis, the fundamental is the lowest frequency. Everything is based on that via overtones or partials. Harmonic is partial or overtone frequency is a multiple of the fundamental tone. All right, so this is kind of a semantic discrepancy here. The way I like to do it, and I think this is the common method, is harmonics are the fundamental, start at the fundamental frequency and go up. So the fundamental frequency is the first harmonic, right? Because 1 is an integer multiple. So the harmonics go from the fundamental frequency up. The overtones go from the octave up, because the octave is the first overtone. So the first overtone is actually the second harmonic. And that's something you see kind of thrown around. People sometimes are playing loose with that and switch back and forth. But that is the way I'm going to go with the definition. Okay, a subharmonic is an integral submultiple of the fundamental frequency. So if your fundamental frequency is 220, 110 is a subharmonic. And we'll talk a little bit about subharmonic in the effects processing. Adding harmonics and overtones, there's lots of ways of doing that, lots of nonlinear processing you can do. Subharmonics are a little trickier, but we can talk about that. There's pitch shifting methods, and there's kind of these Fuji analog digital circuits that are really okay, so let's look at the staff. All right, this is what we talked about last week.
But
Yes?
for the overtone, is it just another integral? Like an integer multiple? Or is it
Good question. It doesn't. I think it doesn't have to be. I think overtones is more general. Harmonics, yeah, are integral, but overtones can be otherwise. Question is where would you get things that are not integer multiples? Because typically, anytime you run anything through a nonlinearity, you get things that are integer multiples. The only time I can think of very easily where you get things that are not integer multiples is if you run two tones through nonlinearity, you get intermodulation products. And I think you could call those overtones. So it's, like I said, it's kind of a semantic thing. Okay, so the musical staff we looked at last week. We've got treble clef on top, bass clef on bottom, middle C. Now, what I've done is I've labeled 5 different Cs. Okay, from below the staff, middle C, and above the, all the way to above the staff. And there needs to be a way of doing, of describing these. And these older books have mentioned, the Olson book and the Jeans book actually go through like 3 or 4 different methods. Some of them label this C0, and then you can add negative numbers or positive. Some are labeled with C and then primes to indicate going up and little c's to indicate going on. There are a bunch of crazy methods. The way I like to do it is to do C4 at middle C. And the question is, okay, well, why 4? Basically, if you follow this down, you get to C0, which will be below 20 hertz. Okay? So that is just below human hearing. And A0 and B0, which again are a little above C, are just above that. So the 0 range is kind of, the good starting point. So put the 0 range where it's just audible. Okay? I think that makes good sense. And the other thing is that this corresponds to the MIDI notation. C4, middle C, I think the MIDI value is 60 hex. It's not going to move. So I find this to be the easiest way. I think